cried out for my return.
Yep, I finally did it. I finally watched Better Call Saul. I was pretty much going to watch this show no matter what, given how much I loved Breaking Bad, but after the positive reception that the Breaking Bad video got, I definitely knew I was going to be making this video. And I'm happy to say that the Funny Lawyer Man show was really good. I don't know if it's quite as good as Breaking Bad, but if these are the two mainlining shows in your franchise, you know you're doing something right. Talk about a perfect series from start to end. I mean, from Breaking Bad to El Camino to this series just does not miss. Oh wait, what's that? Oh, you said there's a new show? Oh what, it's animated? Wait, what, really? What was it called?
And then one, uno, a me.
He's trying to make us do math.
Get it!
I don't really feel comfortable comparing this show to Breaking Bad, seeing as how that can lead to some of the worst reviews on this platform.
Too hardened and experienced to make for a compelling character to follow as he navigates this criminal underworld.
I kind of feel the same way about Breaking Bad to Better Call Saul as I do from Your Name to Weathering with You. Both stories share similar DNA and even take place in the same universe, but the intentions behind the stories are vastly different. And they're both headed up by incredibly stylistic and art-driven filmmakers, who both seem to have a preference for the kind of stories they like to tell. Sure, you can point out all of the things that Breaking Bad does better than Better Call Saul, or all of the things that Your Name does better than Weathering with You, but I just really don't think that that's a good use of anybody's time. I mean, imagine if I made an entire video talking about how the Bagman episode is just a worse version of the 4 Days Out episode from Breaking Bad. But I mean, I'd have to be pretty stupid to do something like...
Are you telling me that Bagman is a superior character building exercise to that? No, you're making that up.
Vince Gilligan really does have a knack for making very morally corrupt three-dimensional characters. I explained this very poorly in my Breaking Bad episode when I talked about characters having a good side and a bad side instead of just saying that characters should have strengths and weaknesses, which you really think about and then you go, well, duh, that makes sense. Every movie or show should have that. But I think it's just weird because, like, you don't have to say anything about it because it's just there in all of these shows, but, like, they do it so good that it, like, stands out. It's kind of like how you don't have to talk about the amazing setups and payoffs in the original Pirates of the Caribbean, but it's a movie that just does it so well that you just want to talk about it. Like, setups and payoffs are a no-brainer for any script, but when you have a movie that does it so well, it's hard to not notice it. Damn, I just love this movie so much. Anyway, let's move away from pirates and get back to criminal lawyers. I don't think I really need to talk about how great Jimmy McGill is. The fact that this show took a character who was basically just the glorified comic relief character in Breaking Bad and made him arguably the most three-dimensional character I've ever seen is a feat unto itself. His arc is fully defined over the course of this show, and my favorite thing is how left up to interpretation it all really is. I know all of us like to think that Saul only existed because Chuck made him so. Chuck held him back and made Jimmy become the worst version of himself. But all of the things that Chuck talks about, we never saw. We never got to see what he was like in his upbringing. And we get to see in Omaha that Gene really can't help himself sometimes. And that question's always left dangling, even till the very end.
So you were always like this?
Was he always like this, or did Chuck make him like this? I mean, even in the first episode, one of the first things we see Jimmy do is trying to pull a con to get the Kettlemans to sign on with him. And his stunt with the billboard is what gets him into elder law, which starts everything. Maybe he would have kept running the scams. Who knows? That's the beauty of it. At the end of the day, all we have is the context that the show gives us. Ooh, boy, that got real deep real fast. Sorry, I'll move away from Jimmy and start talking about some of the other characters. Y'all know Kim Wexler is great, and once again, she's a brilliant three-dimensional character. I love how it's not as simple as Jimmy corrupting her, but as she says at the finale, they're just bad for each other. Both of them bring out the worst versions of each other. I mean, it was Kim's whole idea to do the whole Howard stunt, which, well, we all know how that ended. And to those of you who don't really get why Kim would want to do something so selfish and evil as running all these scams, I think it's heavily implied that she not only gets off to it, but also she wanted to use the money from the Sandpiper settlement to fund her pro bono work, which is super good and heroic, so it's an ends justify the means kind of situation. And look, can I just say, it's a crime that Rhea Seehorn never got an award for this performance. Beyond never giving any awards to the writing, cinematography, Bob Odenkirk, Michael McCain, or Michael Mando, I want to know what judges looked at this scene.
But he sees a woman, she looks like she's in distress, maybe her car broke down. I mean, you'd open the door for her, wouldn't you?
And decided to just go to sleep. I'd also love to know their address so that I can send them a pipe bomb in Minecraft. I hope he plays Overwatch and gets bad teammates and loses. Chuck, Mike, and Nacho are really the only other characters I want to talk about before we get to him. Y'all love some chicanery, so y'all know Chuck is a great antagonistic force. But once again, as I demonstrated earlier, he's still a very three-dimensional character. I love the quote from Michael McCain that Jimmy was the one who made their mom laugh and Chuck was the one who made their mom proud. Mike doesn't really have an arc over the course of this show, but I liked a lot of his scenes anyway. It's fun to get to see him be a proper badass and fully be rooting for his side instead of having partially rooting for him while also watching him try to kill Walter White. It's kind of the same way I feel about Gus in the show, which is it's like when the villain becomes the reformed hero and then you get to see them do kind of dark things, but for a good reason, so then you're finally able to root for them. I don't know, that's just a really weird subgenre of anime I found. Then there's Nacho, who you all know I love. I mean, seriously, who thought these two would be the most badass characters in all of fiction? It's so great getting to see him outsmart all of the Salamancas. And somehow they made him shooting himself in the head, like, really badass. Like, all of us pretty much knew he wasn't going to make it out of this series. And I think that's what gives Nacho's scenes the most tension in the entire show. Him trying to outsmart Tuco, Hector, the twins, Lalo, all of that could go sideways and he could get killed and it would make sense. But now I think it's time to talk about him.
Me? Nobody.
Lalo Salamanca is probably the best villain I've ever seen. It takes a lot to beat out the likes of Hector Barbosa, Raggio, Kiryuin, and especially Hans Gruber. But I think I'm officially ready to say that I like Lalo more than all of them. He's the perfect embodiment of fear, because from the second that he enters frame, you're afraid. He reminds me a lot of Homelander from The Boys, in it that he's utterly unpredictable, but he still has a rationale. It is established from his very first episode that he is driven, he is scary, he is strong, he is smart, and he will kill you if you get in his way, or annoy him, or just kind of near him. But if you're not any of those things, and, you're not really in his way or bothering him, he seems like a nice guy. I really didn't mean for this analogy to come up so much, but he really does remind me of Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean. You see, the beauty of Jack is that he's a genius masquerading as an idiot, whereas Lalo's a cold-blooded monster masquerading as a friendly guy. They don't do it that much with Lalo because nobody really buys it because they're too smart, but that's still part of his character. And the show almost revels in his villainy with how they light his entrance scenes.
Hey, guys!
The backlight combined with the cheerful "hey guys" in this scene is utterly horrifying. And don't think I miss the way they treat him like a frickin' specter in season 6. Lurking in the sewers like Pennywise and It, and showing up with the wind when he shows up to Isekai Howard. The ending of Plan and Execution really is the full culmination of all of this. It all makes sense. We know why he's here, and we know what he's gonna do, and most importantly, we know that he can't let Howard see it. The real beauty of this scene is that not a single line of dialogue is spoken that clues you into the fact that Howard's about to die. But from the second he enters the room, we all know what's going to happen. We've clearly established from the very first episode he shows up in that Lalo doesn't need a reason to kill anyone. So why should Howard be any different? Another strength of this scene is that it's merging two separate worlds of this show that have always seemed so distant. And wow, look at that. Call me Dean Kamen, the guy who invented the segue, because that leads us so nicely into... Honestly, this is the one part of the show I think is kind of bad. This show obviously does an arcane type thing where it has multiple different plot lines running parallel to each other that don't really have a lot to do with each other. And then at certain points in the story, they intersect and the story becomes much bigger as a result. The only reason I say it's an arcane thing is because I just think that Arcane does that kind of story perfectly. Whereas in Better Call Saul, it does have the virtue of having all of the storylines be interesting, but unfortunately the pacing makes it so that the story often gets sidetracked by other stories. This is why I think that my favorite episodes are like Chicanery or Plan and Execution, where it focuses on one storyline for pretty much the entire episode. There's just a couple of times where we'll be watching Jimmy do something really cool or Mike do something really badass, and it'll cut to the other person at an awkward time. What it cuts to is almost always interesting, and I almost always like what we see, but the problem comes that I just want to see what we were already seeing. It's like if you're in a movie theater and your two favorite movies are playing in two separate theaters, and every 15 minutes you have to leave one theater to go watch the other one. I enjoy what I'm watching when I go to the other theater, but the act of constantly moving back and forth is just really jarring. And it should also be noted, this is a very, very minor problem because most of the time the act of switching stories is done well, but sometimes the cuts can be distracting. Talking about all said storylines, I think they are all good. Like a lot of people, I still think Jimmy's storyline is the most interesting. My favorite parts of the show were seeing this normal, if kind of scummy guy turn into a duplicitous criminal. The constant tug of war and battle between Jimmy and Chuck, as well as the love story between Jimmy and Kim, are top tier. And the show really takes its time with all of this stuff too. Like, I remember thinking at the end of season 1 that at the start of season 2 he was going to go full Saul mode on everybody, but that wouldn't really make sense. Instead, we get to see just little bits and pieces of Saul over the course of the early seasons until we finally get... But now let's pivot on to Mike and Nacho. I already told you why I love Nacho. I mean, he's just so interesting as this character who's just way in over his head and, you know, kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And I mean, seriously, how do they make him shooting himself in his head, like, so cool? I think it's just because it's such a fitting end for him, and I mean, he did everything that he wanted to do. He saved his dad, took down Hector. And I know I said the same thing about Rhea Seehorn, but I mean, seriously, what judge looked at this?
So when you are sitting in your shitty nursing home and you're sucking down on your Jell-O night after night for the rest of your life, you think of me, you twisted fuck.
And just decided to go to sleep. I hope that guy enters a Street Fighter 6 tournament and loses. I hope he goes 0-2 at his local. And to finish it off, we'll just talk about Mike. I have the least to say about him because his storyline's rather simple. I mean, around season 4, his storyline gets completely hijacked by Gus when Lalo shows up. I don't really know how I feel about all of this, other than the scenes with Lalo, who obviously I love. I just didn't really like the fact that we were going back to stuff that was so obviously Breaking Bad in this very different show. Again, I like Jimmy's plotline more because it felt different than Breaking Bad, and I feel like they kind of took the criticism of the first couple of seasons not feeling like Breaking Bad too seriously. Just know, all of the scenes that deal with Mike and his family and what happened with his son, all of that's really the best part of his stories. Well, that and when he's playing 4D chess against Hector and the cartel and Gus's men. Now that's a certified Sigma moment. As my final thoughts for this show, all I'll say is it's really good. Sorry if I can't be very articulate right now, seeing as how I'm recording this like 2 or 3 days after finishing the finale. I just really wanted to get this one up, and it's still stirring inside me a little bit. Maybe I'll make a companion piece to this further down the line where I can fully articulate all of my thoughts. But for now, I'm gonna give Better Call Saul a 9 out of 10.